And welcome to another webcast of A Mirror Darkly. Today's webcast is on liberty. It is the concept of freedom and its importance. Both
like
as Christians.
give me liberty or give me death.
Yes.
By the way, I'm a little ragged because it's the second week of school, back to school night, and I'm exhausted. So I'm barely awake, and my voice sounds like George Beverly Shea.
Yes.
So.
Well, since you have to do some of the talking, you'll probably be able to stay awake through most of this.
Yes. If you hear me snoring, just let me be. Just don't let me fall out of the chair.
The idea of having liberty in the modern sense is of relatively recent origin. Founding fathers, the U.S., taking their lead from philosophers in Europe, emphasize the importance of liberty, and that as human beings we have certain natural rights. And these rights, these freedoms, are not things that are granted to us. They are things that are inherent simply by being a human being, which is something that some people have trouble grasping. They seem to somehow think that these are things the government deigns to give us, and that's not the case. These are things that we have inherent. It is freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, freedom to think, to believe, to worship. All these things are aspects of simply being human. You were born with these inherent rights.
Having liberty is like having thumbs. It's just something everybody has.
Exactly. You have a nose in the middle of your face. It's just something you have. And the U.S. Constitution has been designed in such a way as to, as much as possible, prevent government from infringing on those rights in any way whatsoever. Some people are uncomfortable with it. They think there need to be limits placed on certain kinds of speech, certain kinds of writings. And the difficulty with that idea of, well, we should be able to put limits on things is, where do you put them? What is your reason for doing so?
Where do you stop limiting?
Yeah. And who is it that you're going to let do the limiting? What makes them so special that they can decide what you can say and cannot say? They can say what you're going to think and cannot think. That they're going to tell you what you can and cannot believe. That they're going to tell you who you can and cannot assemble with and where.
Well, and really, liberty is self limiting, because you cannot limit someone else's freedom. So I'm free to kill, but as soon as I kill someone, I've now limited their freedom, so I can't do that. So that's why killing is not something that you are free to do.
No.
So,
but speech, despite what some, I would say, small-minded people believe, speech does not harm you. That is the old saying, sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Yes, you can feel insulted. You can feel bad because somebody has said something mean to you. But it does not cause physical damage. Thomas Jefferson, thinking about religious liberty, said that it neither picks my pocket nor does anything to harm me, what that person happens to be worshiping or believing. And as long as it's not picking your pocket or in some way physically harming you, it's hard to say that there should be a limit on it.
Now, here's an interesting concept, because I've been catching up on my podcast, and Scott Adams says in his Coffee with Scott Adams thing,
The Dilbert comic strip person.
Right.
Very
is
funny.
that talking about, and this is his theory, that talking about things keeps it front of mind. So, like the rash of, now I'm going to bring it front of mind, the rash of mass shootings. Maybe I shouldn't air quote it because it does fall under the what's considered the definition of it, the commonly held definition. Don't ask me to recite what it is, like 4 or more people in a public place or something like that. But anyway, anyway, by people talking about it, when you have someone who is not thinking rationally, that's what's in their head, and if they want to kill themselves in a spectacular way, that's the way to do it. I mean, there was a time when you killed yourself by jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge.
Well, occasionally people still do that.
Well, I think there's enough safeguards now. I think it's kind of not a thing anymore. And like the Space Needle, you can't jump off the Space Needle anymore. You can't jump off the Empire State Building because people were doing that, and that was a spectacular way to kill yourself. So one spectacular way to kill yourself now is mass shooting, and because it's front of mind, that's what people think about. So that's what they think of doing. So,
and people view it as I mean, it is a bad thing. It is a problem, but it's sort of like back in the day when people were hijacking airliners and flying them to Cuba. You had that happen relatively frequently. It became a joke. That doesn't happen anymore.
Right.
People don't think about doing that. It's
Well-
no long. Streaking in the 70s was a big thing. I mean, that's not hazardous, except
and they
to
called it the streak.
Yeah.
Ethel.
But again, it's a fad that comes and goes.
Well,
And people worry about the mass shootings and wonder, okay, why is it happening now? And so you have all sorts of explanations. Well, there's more guns, or there's more high-powered rifles, or whatever. That's been, high-powered weapons, rifles, guns, that's been part of the American experience since the get-go. We didn't have as many mass shootings, say, in the 1950s and earlier as we have today. So it's not the guns that are...
right. Well, I've often said...
I don't think that's the cause of the problem.
Right. Well, and a gun just sitting on a table is not going to kill anybody.
Well, no.
It's how it's
True.
used. But another thing that Scott Adams talked about a week or so ago, and no, I'm not becoming his loudspeaker, just these are interesting things that apply to this topic, is that since there's no evidence that any NRA members, which I've said before, I said no NRA members have ever done a mass shooting, so maybe we should require everybody to be an NRA member. Well, he kind of took a different approach to that. Not that he was listening at all to me, because I've said this just to him, but that in background checks or whatever, that if you're an NRA member, it's easier for you, maybe make a law that if you're an NRA member, that it's easier to get a weapon than if you're not. And I think that's totally reasonable, because the NRA provides a lot of training. They have there's a huge knowledge base there about different kinds of guns and whatnot. And so I thought that was an interesting perspective on what I had already thought. And freedom to bear arms, that's another one of our liberties.
Yes, it is. It is the Second Amendment.
And the part of the problem is that like, until somebody does something, you can't limit that freedom, but then somebody has been injured or has died. We just had a girl here in our town who's actually was a student of a friend of mine. She was her student last year, a teacher friend of mine. Her brother shot her. The brother and the two sisters, based on what I briefly read, they were apparently in the bedroom, and he had a gun and pointed at his sister and pulled the trigger. The mom is claiming that it was an accident, but the news is saying that he was a noted gang member. So mom's like, he's not in a gang. So I don't know what all that is, because it's initial reports. So
initial reports are always.
But this girl died at the hands of her brother,
right,
accidental or not, and so limiting his access to guns. Now, I think he was 18. I'm pretty sure he was 18. So having a gun, he was obviously not an NRA member. He wouldn't have been playing with it like he was.
No, you don't.
But
one of the first things that you learn with weapons is you don't point them at people.
Right. So, but until he did something, there was no reason to limit his access. So, except maybe by his parents or something, by, locking them up or whatever.
Right.
But like us, for example, because we have a child who suffers from mental illness, we don't have any weapons in our house. And for a long time, our kitchen knives were put away. They weren't locked up because they were in a place where she was not energetic enough to go get them.
Yes.
So she would grab them out of the drawer if they were in the drawer. So
she no longer does that.
Yeah.
So
and all the ones we
now.
have the sheaths on them, and she would always just grab one and go to her neck with it, and it was this would, with it sheathed, it wouldn't hurt her. So
Right.
But anyway, if you have a situation like that in your family, then you probably shouldn't have weapons.
Right.
But I know my brother has guns because he was in the Marines, and then his wife inherited guns from her dad. But they have a huge gun safe, and they keep them locked up, and they taught their kids how to use weapons. And their kids, to my knowledge, have never played with weapons. None of them have accidentally shot themselves or anyone else, or on purpose either.
Yes.
And so, me personally, I don't like guns because I don't like explosive noises. And so anything
I have
that's...
no interest in that.
I don't like latex balloons either for the very same reason. And latex balloons are like 99% harmless unless you swallow, inhale a piece of the rubber when it pops. But anyway, I wouldn't shoot a gun just because I don't like loud sudden noises. But anyway, I think that's all I was going to say on that subject.
Yeah.
But,
Now, the only time that you have fundamental rights like to speech or press or whatever that are limited is if they do cause physical harm somehow to someone. That is, when you have rights coming in conflict with other laws. For instance, if you belong to religion where you like to sacrifice human beings, you're not going to be able to do that because we have laws against murder. I'm reminded of a story, I don't know if it's a true one or not, but back in the day when England was colonizing India, one of the...
David joined us.
One of the customs in... One of the things that they did in India is that they would burn the widow of someone. As some guy died, his widow then would join the funeral pyre.
Oh.
Either voluntarily or by force, as the case may be.
That's scary.
And
if you die, you're on your own, dude.
Yeah. And
finding me a rich husband.
And the governor of India, the British governor of India, said, "We know that it's your culture to, burn widows upon funeral pyres of their dead husbands. Well, we in England also have a custom. People that kill women, we hang them. And so if you want to continue doing this custom, that's perfectly okay. We will continue with our custom as well. And we'll build a gallows next to your funeral pyre, and after you've done that, then we'll hang you."
Yes, the amount of sacrificed widows dropped dramatically.
Yes, they no longer do that in India. That's one of the things that came out of colonization. There's a book, I just read a review of a book yesterday, and they happened to mention that story. One of the mistakes that people will make is to think that all cultures are equal. There are some cultures that really are not very good, and I would argue that burning widows is probably not a good idea and something that we'd want to undo. Just as the human sacrifices seems to have been relatively widespread among the Native American cultures in Central and South America, is probably something that we can be thankful it no longer exists.
Interesting thing about that, because I didn't know about that widow burning thing.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because widows now in India are relegated to a certain town.
They still have some.
And they're extremely impoverished, so that probably wouldn't have happened if they had continued the widow burning tradition.
Yeah,
but I know it's better to live in poverty than to burn to death on your dead husband.
Well, it illustrates that there are perhaps still some problems culturally there.
Because Oprah had gone to visit, when she still had her show, she went to visit that town, and there are actually women's groups that are working in those towns to teach the widows skills so that they can sell their goods. And so they're able to get some amount of money because their families won't take care of them, which I think is the core problem. Like if you, like for example, with my mother, she's a widow and she had cancer, and she needed someone to go with her to her chemo treatments and stuff, and to help her with her doctor's appointments because she had chemo brain, and then being the age she is, she forgets and gets a little confused at times. So it was better if she had someone else there to write these things down and keep things straight. And it was a toss-up between my sister and I, because my brother lives in Texas. And so my sister can't get the days off that I can. So I would go down there and take care of her. And that's considered like a thing, like taking care of your elderly parents. Although if my mother heard me say elderly, she'd be like, I'm not elderly. Your parents that are older than you by a significant number,
yes,
which is most parents. But anyway, and even if it's just you pay money for them to live somewhere where other people can take care of them because you have more money than you have time, that's still taking care of your parents. And we would not just make our, like your mom's a widow and she manages her own life. She does have family close by, so she needs some, she's in Ohio. And if she needs something more immediate, she's got family there to help her. But you know, we don't send her to go live in some remote town with other widows and just live in poverty.
No.
Oh, Rick Viduka joined us. Hi, Rick.
Yeah, my mother
Stick with us and join the conversation.
Badly.
Yeah.
She still drives.
Yeah.
And she drives well, which is remarkable for an 86, almost 87-year-old person.
Yeah, my mom drives. She just doesn't like to drive at night. She doesn't see very well at night. And she's real unsure of herself as far as directions, which is also an affliction your mother has.
She's always had that affliction. Right. I have that I've always had that affliction.
Thankfully, I don't, or we may not find our way to church every Sunday and every Saturday.
Yes. No, I mean, years ago when we'd go places, my dad and you would hang back and watch my mother and I struggle to find our way around places and laugh at us.
Yes, they'd step out of the elevator and they'd have a whole discussion. Should we go this way or that way? And his dad and I would just stand there and shake our heads. His dad, we'd be standing behind him in the elevator. We'd let them stand in the front and he'd go, watch this. So I knew he was on for the game. And so then they would step out, we'd step out behind him and wait for them to turn around and go, which way should we go? Because they always were confident they could figure it out if they just collaborated, but no.
Yeah, when you have two people that have zero sense of direction, which is where I got my zero sense of direction from, I would assume.
Because your sister does fine with direction.
Yeah, my sister does fine. She gets her, her athleticism and apparently that she got from my dad. So my sister is very much a sports fan. She watches every single kind of sport you can imagine. Oh my gosh,
it's like rabid.
Yeah, unlike me, all I care about are the Dodgers. And that's just because I played baseball growing up and I enjoy baseball. So, and as I've talked about before, baseball is the meaning to life, the universe, and everything. If you remember that convoluted process. 42 Jackie Robinson, Dodgers. Yeah.
Yeah, so.
Okay.
His delusional thinking at work.
No, I'm just being amused. It's
really about the Philadelphia Eagles.
It's not very funny anymore. Say it too often.
Philadelphia Eagles, Philadelphia Freedom, whatever. Independence Day, Declaration, those things.
Okay, well, that's what we're talking about now. Yeah. Well, not the Eagles, but we're talking about liberty. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty.
So we're going to talk about liberty as Christians?
Well, there's liberty as Christians, but it kind of goes together.
What's interesting is the nations that have the most liberty are the nations that
have the most heavily influenced by Christianity or Judaism. That is, when you think in terms of the nations that have the most freedoms, where the status of women is highest, gay rights, all of these things that came out of the Christian-dominated parts of the world. And I don't think that that's an accident. That is, we don't see the concept of women's rights coming out of India, for instance. Quite the opposite. It took the British to at least keep them from killing their widows. You don't see, certainly you don't see the status of women being very high in Muslim-dominated societies, unfortunately.
And it's interesting because people will say that Christianity and Judaism is very patriarchal and doesn't give women much status, but really the most status women have are in those influenced countries.
Part of the problem that people have is, they'll look at the Old Testament and see all the things that are not up to modern standards. The problem is that people lack perspective. And I see it constantly. It drives me nuts. Historical perspective is very important, and cultural perspective. And one of the mistakes that people make is to look at the Old Testament in isolation, rather than looking at it in the context of the rest of the ancient Near East. And when you see it in relation to the rest of the ancient Near East, you realize that what was going on in Israel was something radically different than what was going on elsewhere. Yes, the status of women in ancient Israel was not as good as it is in the modern world. However, compared to the status of women in the cultures around them, considerably better.
Right.
And that's generally the case with a lot of things. One of the most intriguing things, I mention this not infrequently in teaching, is to look at the requirements of a king in Deuteronomy chapter 17, I think 17. And you have laid out there what the king was supposed to do. And one of the remarkable statements that's made there is the king was not to think of himself as better than anybody else. And he was supposed to make a copy of the law so that he would have that.
Write it out by hand.
Write it out by hand so he'd have a copy of that. And one of the out of the ordinary things about the kings in Israel is that they were subject to the law. That is, they were not better than any other Israelite. They did not have more rights or privileges than anybody else. That is, they were subject to the same laws and rules that everybody else was subject to. And you see that reflected even in the northern kingdom of Israel several centuries later, when they're unusually poor about worshiping only one God. Yet on that particular topic, even with their worst king of all, Ahab, who is viewed as being a really bad king, you see him thinking like an Israelite would, regardless. That is, he wanted to buy somebody's property. So he went to him and asked, "Can I buy your property?" The man said no. He leaves and he's all depressed because he can't get that property. His wife, who comes from outside of Israel, non-Israelite, looks at him like he's insane. And she tells him, "I'll fix it for you." And so she ends up stealing the property and killing the guy to get the property, which is the way kings outside of Israel would normally behave. That's not and that's part of the reason why this king was viewed as so bad, because that was just, you didn't do that sort of thing. It was outrageous. And even his natural impulse was not to do that sort of thing. But that's remarkable compared to everybody else around them. The idea that the leadership is subject to the same rules and regulations that everybody else is. And that's a new thing in world history.
Right.
And so, yes, the status of women is not great in ancient Israel. But within... if you look at, say, modern Judaism, or you look at what Christianity has done historically, the status of women has kept getting better and better and better. And the status of people in general. That is, the movement against slavery, for instance, grows out of Christianity, not out of some of these other cultures.
Right.
Now, Christians are human beings. They do reprehensible things, and you have had Christians that would try to justify slavery. Nevertheless, it was Christians who spearheaded the abolition of slavery in the United States and England. And thinking in terms of, say, modern Judaism, if you look at the nation of Israel today, the nation of Israel is the only place in the ancient, it's the only nation in the Middle East today where women are equal to men. Women are members of the armed forces in Israel. Gay rights are part of their society. I mean, they are fully a Western oriented, and we talk about Western civilization, it's influenced by Judaism and Christianity.
Right. David said, I find that many people today, liberals, are confusing liberty with liberties.
What does he mean by that?
What do you mean by liberty versus liberties? So we'll give him a minute to respond, because the show is about 10 or 15 seconds behind when people view it than when we say it. So we'll wait and I'll see.
But anyway, wanted to make sure I brought up this too. If you remember Dandy's daughter Kayla, when she was quite young, and I've mentioned this frequently as well, pointed out that when you look at the Garden of Eden, and God giving Adam and Eve the choice to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, if being good was the most important thing, then God would not have given them the freedom to do that.
Right.
And so what this tells us is how important liberty is from God's perspective. That is, it was more important to God that human beings be free than that they be good. Freedom trumps being good. And that's something as a civilization that we constantly try to balance. That is, we're fearful of letting people run amok because we're afraid that they'll end up hurting each other. And so we try to have some controls to keep people from getting hurt. And yet, you don't want to do too much, or else that's a bad thing, because living in a society that lacks liberty is not very pleasant. That is, all you have to do is ask yourself, would you rather live in Nazi Germany or the United States? And it's a fairly easy choice. That is, the freedom is something that we do appreciate. We don't, and just like any teenager, nobody likes being told what to do.
Right.
You don't want to tell an American, no, you can't say that, no, you can't eat that, no, you can't drink that, no, you're likely to get punched.
And I think, too, when you're looking at the Bible as a whole, the Old Testament is a lot stricter than the New Testament. And I had this thought, actually, that the Old Testament's kind of the prequel to the main movie, and we're kind of like the Star Wars episodes where they did the middle section of the movies, and they did I don't remember which order they came out in, but they did the prequel set, the first three, say the middle three, and then you have the end 3 or 900.
There's 2 now. There's one more coming.
Or 900, however many they end up doing, because it's a big moneymaker.
Story.
Yeah, but so we're kind of living in that third set of Star Wars movies. And the New Testament is kind of that original middle section. And then the Old Testament is the movies that happened before that came out later. But anyway, because there are things that are prohibited in in the Old Testament, that because of God's progressive revelation, that now it's just love God, love people. And
of course, it was actually kind of that way then, too.
It was, but they had more specific rules that they had to abide by. One, because we have the Holy Spirit, we don't need all the rules, right? But they needed the constant reminder every day. Okay, I'm wearing cotton, I can't wear polyester with it. Not that they have that, or they couldn't have worn polyester because it's a mix of things probably. But
I think polyester is just a chemical-based thing. It'd be fine. You just wouldn't be able to mix it with some other thread at the same time.
Oh, okay. So anyway.
But the point was just to make you stop and think and remind you that you have this relationship with God. It wasn't so much that God didn't disliked mixing threads. It's just that this was a way of
God's Fashion Magazine. That's the
reminding people that it's like circumcision. Circumcision pre-existed the time of Abraham, and there are other cultures in the ancient Near East that practiced circumcision. There was already a word for it. And so when God told Abraham, this is what I want you to do, it wasn't a shock to Abraham.
And he didn't go like, what's that?
Yeah.
And like, really?
Yeah.
You must be joking.
No, it wasn't, because the Egyptians did it. There are some other cultures that did it. The Philistines are notable because they didn't. So they're always described as the uncircumcised Philistines. Because they were weird compared to other people that were in that general region.
Now, here's another observation that I've made, and I have to say that it bothers me. And it still kind of makes me angry, but I pray about those people, about the people instead. Is that, okay, so when we drive to LA or like in the Valley, there's a really, there's a big Hasidic community there, Hasidic Jewish community in the North San Fernando Valley. And then there are large Jewish sections in LA. And it's interesting to me that in the more conservative Jewish, do you call them sects?
Yeah, they're sects.
Okay,
Or
so
if it was Christians, we called them denominations.
Okay,
or I called them sects.
Okay, but anyway,
Judaism has denominations just like any human organization is going to fragment.
Okay, that's not my point.
Okay, anyway.
So anyway, but the women have a certain way that they dress, and so do the men.
Right.
When you go to Universal Studios or Disneyland, that's where it's most notable because it's so hot, is that the women are covered head to toe. Now, some of them are in lighter colors because they're kind of more modern Arabic women. I'm talking about Arabic women.
You need
Muslim women. Sorry. Muslim women. Some of them wear lighter colors because, I don't want to say Arabic because there's Christian Arabic people.
So just say
but anyway, Muslim women, they're covered from head to toe, either in lighter colors or they're all in black, which I've seen, and I've seen them even with their faces covered with black. They're at Disneyland or Universal Studios. It is flippin' hot. I mean, I'm dressed like this, shorts and a tank top, and I'm sweating. And they're dressed all in black. They usually have pants on underneath, and I know this because when they're going up the escalator and their skirt is blowing, you can see the leggings underneath. So you've got black leggings on, a black skirt, a black top of some sort, I don't know what it's called, and then the head covering, the whole 9 yards. They're dressed like that, and their husbands and their sons are in shorts and short sleeve shirts. They're usually button-up shirts. They're I haven't observed a lot in tank tops, or not tank tops, in t-shirts. But the men can dress however they want, and the women have to be covered. And that really bothers me. And that shows how oppressive it is. Even though they say it's their choice, it's really oppressive, and it bothers me. If it was our belief that we should dress like covered up, it would be fine if he was doing it too and I was doing it, because then it would not be oppressive. It would be an equal thing.
Equal oppression.
Right, equal oppression. But
oppress everybody.
Right, oppress everybody the same. But it really bothers me, especially the women that are dressed all in black. And now their daughters, as they get older, will sometimes choose to wear the hijab. What's the Habib? I don't know what Habib is. I just made that up.
Some guy over there.
Yeah. The hijab. Well, I get it mixed up with Haboob too, which is a big dust storm. Yeah.
Yes.
So, anyway, but the men, they're not even wearing hats, and the more conservative Jewish men will be wearing black hats, and their wives aren't wearing hats; they're just wearing wigs because you cover up your hair.
Right.
But that was also interesting
it's
too.
It's equal opportunity oppression. When I was in Israel, and some of the Christian sites that we would visit, particularly the Eastern Orthodox sites, more so, well, maybe some of the Catholic, but I think it's mostly Eastern Orthodox sites, they did have dress codes. And so, you know, being in Israel, you'll notice that most of the Israelis dress like Ruth does here, shorts, tank top, whatever. And being in Israel, we tended to dress that way as well. If we were going to go into an Eastern Orthodox thing, both the men and the women had to have their shoulders covered and their legs covered. It wasn't specifically women, and it's both genders, you had to be covered up. And so they would actually have clothing available that you could put on so you could visit the place. But yeah, equal opportunity oppression in that regard.
Actually, the Greek Orthodox, I think it is, monastery outside of Phoenix. My mom and I want to visit sometime when we go to Arizona. We won't do it on this trip, but sometime we will. He responded, so I'll get to it in a second, David. Anyway, you have to have your legs covered and you have to have your shoulders covered.
Yeah.
And so we're going to buy
clothes. Men and women.
Well, my mom and I are both women, so
this is true.
we
So I'm just
won't have
saying that the
but unless we find ourselves a man, we'll make him dress up.
yeah.
But, anyway, so what David said was, we're offered liberty and justice for all, but many people today are taking liberties with the freedoms we are granted, thus trying to extinguish our liberty. Example, we as Christians come under fire for not accepting other...
Don't do
it says Seymour.
I know, but don't poke at it.
Oh, it's not
the screen doesn't work
Oh,
properly. It got damaged, so use the mouse.
Don't poke at it. Okay, David, I won't poke your comments. I gotta scroll down. Okay. Example, we as Christians come under fire for not accepting other forms of religion, and those pointing the finger are at the same time condemning Christianity, thus doing the same thing they accuse us of. We have liberty, but they take liberties with our liberty to come against us.
Well, it's nothing new. That is one of the problems in a civilization, is trying to balance all the competing ideas. If you read the Federalist Papers, one of the things that's interesting about that is the importance of factions in their thinking about how our civilization would function, and the need for factions. That is, the larger the population and the more factions you have, the less likely you are to find people's liberties being repressed.
Interesting.
Because everybody has to compromise with each other in order to manage to survive. They viewed government, they recognize government as being a necessary evil. That is, both necessary and evil. And
which the Bible also says.
Which the Bible is very clear on. That is, when Samuel, when the people asked for a king, Samuel was upset about it, and God said, don't worry about it, they're rejecting you. They're not rejecting you, they're rejecting me. Just like they've been worshiping idols and other gods, they're doing the same thing now by asking for a king. And asking for a king was viewed as a sin and an evil. If you read 1 Samuel chapters 8 through 12, you'll find out that the idea of government is not a positive thing at all. But anyway, my point was that you're always going to have conflict between the rights of various groups. And they'll swing back and forth, and there'll be constant arguments, and that's just the nature of living in this kind of a situation. And yes, there will be people try to push their agenda to the exclusion of other people's liberties, but then they'll get pushed back. And it's just going to go back and forth like that. That's the way it's always been throughout our history. Sometimes, the rights of Christians have run roughshod over the rights of other religious groups. You have other various religious groups that have suffered persecution in the United States. I mean, if you look at the history of Mormonism, for instance, it's not really a positive thing so far as how they were treated oftentimes. And the thing that we have to keep in mind is if you want to have liberty for yourself, you have to allow other people to have liberty as well.
Right.
You know, people say, oh, how bad it is that, you know, prayer has been excluded from schools. Or again, historical perspective would have been useful and that sort of thing, because the way it functioned was that at the beginning of the school day, somebody over the intercom would give a prayer. You really want a government official giving the prayers.
And then what kind of prayer is it? And I said this to my mother a lot. My mother thinks there should be prayer in schools, and I said, as long as we're giving kids tests, there'll be prayers in schools.
That is, the individual students can pray as much as they want.
Right.
What you don't want is to have the teacher, the principal, some administrator giving a prayer.
The people that say it are Christians usually
that want
Christian prayer. But the thing is that what if you have a Mormon teacher, or a Jehovah's Witness teacher, or a Scientology teacher, or an atheist, or, you know, a Satanist, you know?
Yeah.
It's like, hail Satan, and on we go, you know?
Right.
And it's like, that's not right. And
yeah.
I've always, Rastafarian, smoke a little doobie, and amen, here we go for a day. But that would only be in high school. But anyway,
this is the problem, and
I've always made that point. Like I don't want to be praying in a room of students whose parents would oppose my praying over their kid. What if the kid is Muslim? You know. Mm-hmm. And you cannot possibly come up with a prayer that covers everything. Even really,
and then if you do come up with a prayer that covers everything,
it's meaningless.
It's meaningless.
So, and
here's some pleasant words.
Yeah. So, well, and here's the thing. What it does do, and really this is satisfied by the Pledge of Allegiance, mm-hmm. is it gets everybody focused and it starts your day. That's why they do it at the beginning of board meetings, like a school board meeting. Some school board meetings will still have a prayer. City council meetings will have a prayer, and they'll invite some religious leader from the community. Mm-hmm. And so 1 week you'll have a Baptist prayer, the next week the next month you'll have a Catholic prayer, and the next month you'll have a whatever prayer. But
I would argue that those sorts of things are questionable in our system. That is, we've been doing it a long time because of the dominance of Christianity in our culture. Mm-hmm. Again, the idea that you have one group running roughshod over others, mm-hmm. and Christians have done that as much as we now are decrying others that are trying to eat away at, well, we've done this all the time. What do you mean we can't do it anymore? Well, mm-hmm. again, everybody
really, should be outside of focusing everybody. What good does it do?
Exactly.
I'm all for the moment of silence, mm-hmm. and I think that that would be a beneficial thing mm-hmm. to do at the beginning of school.
It gets everybody quiet.
Right. Well, and it allows them the opportunity, if they want to pray, or if they just want to count to 20 in their head, even for small children, and you introduce it as such. This is a time when if praying is something that you do, you can do that. If you want to practice your ABCs in your head, you can do that. If you want to think about what you're doing after school today, you can do that. Whatever. It's just a good kind of meditative practice. Mm-hmm. And like our morning announcements, Mr. Denning goes through like the behavior expectations for our school, and then he'll make some comments about like keeping your hands to yourself and things like that, and just to improve school-wide behavior. And then he'll say, and now, how does he put it? And now you may do your flag salute, something like that. It's not that bad. He says something good. But anyway, if they did a moment of silence, mm-hmm. that would be a good thing. And then you could do your flag salute and mm-hmm. your morning routine, whatever you do.
And speaking of the flag salute, and I'm also going to bring up the In God We Trust thing. The flag salute, the Pledge of Allegiance, was developed by a socialist who was a Baptist minister. Kind of a weird combination. But the under God phrase that shows up in it didn't enter the Pledge of Allegiance until the mid-1950s. Mm-hmm. It was inserted as a reaction to the Cold War against the atheist Soviet Union, mm-hmm. to say, we're not atheists. Screw all the atheists that live here in the United States, but regardless. Mm-hmm. So that's, again, questionable. And then the In God We Trust on currency, The first time that In God We Trust shows up on U.S. currency is during the Civil War. It was on the 2-cent piece in 1862 or 63. And then it didn't appear again. That is just for that brief period of time, and then you don't have it on any U.S. currency until the 20th century, when you see it showing up on the Lincoln penny, and it eventually spread, and you end up on all our currency, and then it became federal law that you're supposed to do this. So again, it's not like this is somehow minted in stone, or it's
minted.
Always,
ha ha ha.
It's always been part of the way we think. No, it's a relatively recent innovation in U.S. thinking. Because, again, the idea is, if you go to the First Amendment, that the government is not supposed to be establishing religion. That is, Roger Williams, who is the founder of the Rhode Island colony, and also the first Baptist founded the First Baptist Church in the U.S., also in Rhode Island. He wrote a booklet on toleration. And because Baptists have been persecuted by everybody and their brother, he thought it was a good idea that, government should have no say in religion at all. And the point that he made in his pamphlet was that allowing government to get involved in churches leads to the churches becoming corrupt. That is, the state will tend to corrupt religion. Thomas Jefferson, a few years later, argued from the other side and said that the church will tend to corrupt the state. And both of them are correct. And so you want to keep the government out of the church, you want to keep the church out of the government. Now, because neither thing works out too well.
Rhode Island is really the first state to truly have religious freedom, correct?
Yeah. Along with Pennsylvania, because the Quakers had the same problem. Pennsylvania was founded by a Quaker. Quakers are persecuted by everybody. They also
hence why it's called the Quaker State, and their motor oil is Quaker State motor oil.
Yes, but they also pushed the idea of religious toleration and freedom, and government not being part of it.
Because people, like we teach the kids, the Pilgrims came here to find religious freedom, but they did not afford that same
they wanted to be
other
able to,
people.
Yeah, they wanted to be able to worship the way they wanted to worship.
And make everybody else
do exactly the same thing.
So it was really just oppression moved to the other side of the pond.
Yeah.
So.
And for
which I will admit, I am from that long legacy of oppression since my ancestor didn't come over on the Mayflower, but he did organize the Mayflower effort and stayed back with the Speedwell. Because it was taking on water, he raised more money for that, and then he came over later. And then his son lived with Governor Bradford while he went back to Europe to bring more people over. But anyway, just saying that I'm from a long line of oppressors. You're welcome.
But yeah. I mean, a lot of the colonies had established churches. That is, what an established church means is that some of your tax money goes to support the church. Now, one of the things that's interesting to notice is of the industrialized nations in the world, the United States has the most participation in religious services on a weekly basis. About a third of the American populace goes to church at least twice a month. If you go to Europe or other places like that, the percentage of people that participate in religion is very, very tiny. What's the major difference between Europe and the U.S. is the U.S. we have separation of church and state. In Europe, the churches are established by the state. That is, part of your tax dollars go to support the Anglican Church in England. Part of your tax dollars go to support the Catholic Church in Spain.
So you've already given your offering. There's no point in going You've already tithed.
Yes, plus the churches then don't have a lot of incentive to evangelize because they get the same amount of money regardless. And that may be part of the difference.
It's interesting.
Yes. So you have 2 or 3% participation in Europe versus 30% here, and that may be part of the difference.
And it's super evident when you go to Europe, because really the cathedrals and stuff, they're mostly for tourists. and go, wow, look at this really, really old church. We don't
How
have
pretty
any
it
church.
is.
Yeah, we don't have any churches this old in America because America's not that old.
No.
But yeah.
Yeah, freedom has certain advantages. About the only limitation that you want to put, and see, this is the other thing that people have difficulty with, is that the best, if you have someone saying something you don't like, you don't try to make them shut up, you don't try to drown them out, you don't try to prohibit what they're saying.
Unless you're from a university.
Because then what right do you have then to say what you want to say? That is, everybody needs to be able to say whatever it is they want to say. The best way to counter speech that you disagree with is with more speech.
Yeah.
The best way to counter writing that you disagree with is with more writing. This is the whole concept of freedom of speech, freedom of the press, is that you don't want the government being in the business of deciding what can be said and what cannot be said. You don't want the government to decide what you can print, what you cannot print. You know, people get all up in arms about hate speech, and, you know, people saying racist things are not things that we like. But again, the best counter to that is going to be speech that criticizes those that hold beliefs that are reprehensible.
Right.
You don't have to outlaw the speech that you find reprehensible. You drown it out through reason and rationality and emotion and whatever else. You don't have to prohibit it.
Well, and then
And racist speech.
hate speech, that is such a wide road, because if I say anything that
Annoys you.
that annoys someone, then it's hate speech. Like if I say I don't like your pants and
Well, it's a
you
buzzword.
get mad, you're like, oh, that's hate speech.
Well, it becomes a buzzword and it becomes meaningless.
Yeah.
It's just, all you're doing is, it's name calling. It's an ad hominem argument. That is, you are ugly and your mother dresses you funny. It's at that level of what you're doing. It's not useful. You counter speech or ideas or points of view that you disagree with through your own speech, your own publications, your own whatever. And so religion, same thing. You should all be free to evangelize. That is, to get up and present your point of view and what you believe and why you believe it, and try to convince other people to agree with you.
And they can
They can
stand up
choose
and
to.
say, I don't agree, and here's why, and walk away.
And say that you're a stupid idiot, and off you go. The story is told of, I think it was Herbert Hoover, that he's at home eating dinner with his family, and his teenage son pops off and tells his father that he can go F himself. And his wife is shocked and looks at him, aren't you going to do something? And Hoover is sitting there thinking, and he says, well, if he is speaking as an American citizen to the President of the United States, then that's well within his rights to say that.
But if he's my son,
I need to spank him. And so he's a bit of a dilemma there as to how he's supposed to respond to that.
true.
But we have the right as American citizens to stand in front of the White House and say whatever nasty things we want to say about the president. Of course, there's also the story told during the Cold War. American is visiting Moscow, and he tells the person he's with that, as an American, he can go stand in front of the White House and just say all sorts of invective against the American president, and nothing will happen. And the communist says, well, that's no problem. I can stand up and say all sorts of nasty things about the president of the United States.
As well.
Yeah, I won't get in any trouble either.
Yeah.
Stand in front of the Kremlin and do that. Well, that's another story.
You won't get to your
You
second
won't.
sentence.
Yeah. So, but no, freedom is important, and one of the weird things to think about regarding the nature of the way God relates to humanity is to realize that God is a permissive parent. That is, he has granted us the freedom to do pretty much anything we want to do, and he does not seem to intervene a whole lot in preventing that.
Of course, you have to live with the natural consequences
You do live
of
with
your
natural
behavior,
consequences of your behavior.
which is how we treat our adult children.
Exactly. That is, we would like to force our adult children to make wise choices, or what we think are wise choices. But we recognize that because they are adults, we can't intervene like that. They have to be allowed to do whatever it is
you
they're going to do.
kind of see the Bible in those stages of children. When your children are very, very small, you have very strict rules. Don't touch the hot stove. If you touch the hot stove, not only will you be burned, but I'm going to smack your butt too. And you have very...
Don't play in the street.
Don't play in the street, you know, things like that. Hold my hand when we're walking through the parking lot. Or like Vanessa, raise your hand while you're walking through the parking lot, because I told them, I said, when they were little, I told them that the drivers can't see you, so you need to stand by mommy because they can see me because I'm tall enough. One day Vanessa was walking in front of me and she had her hand up in the air, and I said, what are you doing? She says, this way the people in the cars can see me. She was very aware of how small she was.
Yes.
But, Larice is on. She said, you know, I have come to the point in my life that negative racial slurs mean nothing to me. I'm old. I know who I belong to, and I'm created just how I'm supposed to be. In fact, I embrace the words. Well, good for you, Larice.
Yeah.
And I know that's hard because when you are a member of a group who has very specific racial slurs that come at them. I mean, like, when I was a kid and we watched Archie Bunker, and Sammy Davis Jr. called Archie a honky. You know, that was funny, and it didn't there was no visceral reaction to it, like, oh, you called me a honky. You know, it's like, because we're not.
Because being, think in terms of white privilege, we're the upper thing, so you're punching up. Anyway,
right. So anyway, but.
It's the other direction that's bad.
Yeah,
really.
But I feel bad that I even mentioned this in Sunday school. I grew up in an environment where we never used the N-word, but for other groups we used
words.
Those, well, it wasn't like cursing, but it was words for that group of people. And if you ever watched Archie Bunker, he used the very same words.
Yeah.
And it was just a normal part of growing up in that area. But I had friends from all those groups. It wasn't like I lived in this sterile white neighborhood without any kind of other group.
You just didn't realize the terms are derogatory.
Right. And because it wasn't like we just used it. Like, we had our Italian friends, we had a word for them. We had our Irish friends, which is interesting because now I found out I'm Irish. But we had a word for them, and you wouldn't. That was just how you described them. It was, like the white family down the street. You had the family down the street. But it was just a label that didn't have emotion behind it. That's what it was. There was no emotion behind it because they did it too. They did it to every one of the groups.
Yeah.
So, and you could say it directly to them, and they didn't get offended.
In terms of Larice embracing the terms, it's sort of similar to what you see happen. For instance, in the United States, the word Yankee was a derogatory term, which we then embraced and have made our own. And you see that in the African American community.
Yankee Doodle.
I know, but the term Yankee was not a positive one.
Right.
And so you see that with the African American community embracing some of these negative terms and using them to suck the
energy
out of them.
Well, it's like my daughter and I, we fool around and we'll flip each other off, and it really irritates him. But I told him, I said, it takes the power out of it. She has a lot of rage because of her mental illness, and so a lot of words have been used to try to hurt us, and a lot of actions and stuff like that, and just we don't do it around other people that wouldn't understand. We have secret ways of doing it, like scratching our face or whatever, but it's in the sense of joking around. It really sucks it sucks the energy out of it. So when she is angry,
There's no
she does not flip us
power
off
to
when
it.
she's angry.
Right, because there's no power.
Right. When she stops flipping me off, that's when I know she's getting mad.
Yeah. Which is one of the things that happens with profanity, is as it gets overused, eventually it loses any power.
Right.
So anyway, we are at the top of the hour.
Ooh,
It's
we
almost
are.
5 o'clock, so good little ad.
Okay. So, A Mirror Darkly, Unbridled Inquiry is brought to you as a ministry of Quartz Hill School of Theology, which is also a ministry of Quartz Hill Community Church. If you are looking for a church and you live in the Antelope Valley, we have morning worship every Sunday morning at 11 a.m. If you don't live in the Antelope Valley and you want a church to worship with, or you're just free during that time, we do live stream our services on Facebook, and our Facebook page is Quartz Hill Community Church. For those who are local, we're at 51st Street West and Avenue K in Quartz Hill. And for the School of Theology, there are free classes online, and if you want credit for them, there's a nominal fee for it. We also do have classes live here, and you can sign up for those as well. So anyway, we're here every Saturday at 4 o'clock with varying topics. What's next week's topic?
Next week's topic
You didn't
is, I forgot to look, it's on the Facebook page.
I know, but then I've got to
I know.
break it down and go there. So anyway, if you join A Mirror Darkly, if you join that Facebook page, you'll be able to see what the schedule of topics is. Schedule is.
Yeah.
And then
I've got it out through October, I think.
okay. So anyway, I hope you'll join us next Saturday, and you guys have a good week.
Thank you.